Before we begin, tonight's stories take a breath. Wherever you are right now, at home in your car or tucked beneath the sheets, thank you for choosing to spend your time with me. I hope you're warm, safe, and comfortable. If not, maybe this quiet corner of the night can offer you a moment of stillness, even as the shadows in these stories begin to move. Have you ever made a decision that felt so small, so harmless, that you barely remembered making it? A shortcut you thought would save time. A reply you sent without thinking. A door you opened just because it wasn't locked. Most of us have, and most of us are lucky enough to walk away from those moments unchanged. But not everyone. Tonight you'll hear 8 stories, 8 decisions, 8 people who chose wrong and paid the price in ways they never could have imagined. Each story is a path taking a warning, a whisper in the dark, asking only one thing: what would you have done? These are not stories of evil people. These are stories of everyday choices, tiny moments of curiosity or kindness or carelessness that unravel into something else entirely. So settle in, stay close, and listen carefully. Because sometimes the worst mistakes don't look like mistakes at all. Sometimes they just begin with a yes. Let's begin. The first story begins not with a scream, but with a mirror. A mirror that should have only shown what was in front of it, yet chose instead to reveal something that had been waiting behind the surface for far too long. What happens when curiosity meets reflection, and the boundary between what is seen and what sees back begins to blur? Let me tell you what the mirror showed her, and why it should have stayed hidden. Story 1. What the mirror showed her should have stayed hidden. Madeline Harper had always romanticized old places. She preferred hotels with creaky floorboards over pristine resorts and welcome dust as a sign of authenticity, not neglect. When she booked a weekend at the Claiborne Hotel in New Orleans, it was meant to be a solo retreat, a quiet break from the sameness of her apartment, her job, and her obligations. The hotel stood tall and narrow, tucked between 2 modern towers like an aging storyteller surrounded by disbelieving youth. Its red brick facade cracked with ivy, its windows framed in heavy velvet curtains, and its lobby adorned with brass lanterns that swayed even when the air was still. The woman at the front desk hesitated when handing Madeline the key to room 306. Her eyes flicked upward, then settled quickly back onto the registry. She said nothing of significance, but her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the key into Madeline's palm. The elevator groaned on the way up, exhaling fatigue with every floor as if protesting her decision to go higher. The 3rd floor smelled of mothballs and perfume, the kind used by women who wore gloves and said thank you with their eyes. The hallway was dim, the carpeting worn to threadbare lines, as if the ghost of hurried guests still paced its length. Room 306 stood at the far end next to a tall, narrow window that let in nothing but yellowed light. The door creaked open easily, revealing a room frozen in time. The wallpaper was pale gold, patterned with fleur-de-lis. The bed was a wrought iron frame dressed in ivory lace. Across from it stood an antique vanity with a high curved mirror draped in thick black velvet. There was something strange about the velvet cover. It wasn't dusty like the rest of the room. It didn't hang quite right. The folds looked intentional, too symmetrical, as though someone had arranged them with reverence. Madeline felt a brief unease in her stomach, the kind that flutters before a storm. She dismissed it with a quiet laugh, blaming her imagination and the setting sun's moody glow. She unpacked, slowly took a hot shower, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the covered mirror, wondering why anyone would go through the trouble of hiding a piece of furniture so central to the room. That night, the mirror haunted her in silence, its shape imposing despite being hidden. She could not sleep. Her eyes kept drifting toward the velvet as though it might move without prompting. When the wind tapped at the window, she nearly jumped from the mattress. Deciding then that the only way to put her nerves to rest was to pull the cover off and prove to herself there was nothing wrong with the mirror in an old room. It was just glass. It reflected nothing more than the person who stood in front of it. With slow, careful hands, she approached and pulled the velvet down. It slid free with a sound that reminded her of silk over bone. The mirror was tall, framed in dark wood, carved with leaves and thorns. The glass itself looked wrong. Too smooth, too dark. It did not reflect her immediately. Instead, it held her face for a moment too long, like the glass needed time to interpret her shape and feed it back. Then it snapped into clarity and Madeline saw herself, and then something behind her. A movement. Quick a shape, undefined. She turned sharply, but the room was empty. She laughed again, nervously now, told herself it had been a trick of light and nerves. She sat back down, but the mirror, now fully exposed, seemed to grow in the room, its presence expanding, pulling at her eyes, drawing her back. She glanced again, this time saw herself sitting, but the image smiled just slightly more than she had. The tilt of the head was off. The hands folded in her lap were still, but the fingers tapped as if waiting. She looked down. Her own fingers were still. Her breath caught. She looked back. The reflection had returned to normal, or so she thought. Until she noticed the mirror no longer showed the bed behind her. It showed a hallway, unfamiliar, dark, lit only by flickering wall sconces. She stood slowly, approached the mirror, saw that the hallway and the reflection stretched on with no end, as if carved into the depths of the hotel where no guest had ever walked. As she reached to touch the glass, the surface rippled, not violently, but like a puddle disturbed by breath. Her fingertips brushed it. Cold spread up her arm, a numbing chill that moved faster than blood. She tried to pull back, but her hand was already too deep. The mirror clung to her skin like ice, like something alive. She saw her reflection smile again, wider now. Teeth too straight, too white, too many. She screamed, but no sound came. Not in the room, not in the glass. The reflection stepped forward while she was pulled inward. The swap was silent, absolute. She was behind the glass, staring out, watching as her own body turned from the mirror, walked to the bed, lay down as if nothing had happened. She beat against the inside of the mirror, but the glass no longer moved. Her screams echoed into the infinite hallway behind her. Swallowed by walls that never ended, days passed. She did not age inside the glass, but she grew tired. The hallway behind her remained unchanged, always flickering, always empty, but she felt watched, not from behind, but from within the mirror, from the other reflections. Waiting to replace others like her, she was not alone inside. Not really back in the real world. Her body lived on. It moved, smiled, walked through the lobby and waved goodbye to the woman at the front desk, who merely nodded with wide, tired eyes. It checked out and left. But Madeline Harper never did. She remained in room 306 behind the glass, waiting for someone else to grow curious to pull back the velvet and reach for truth. They never warned guests about the mirror because no one ever truly complained about it. Those who stayed in room 306 either left quietly or not at all. The velvet was always redraped carefully, with reverence and fear, by the cleaning staff who never made eye contact with their own reflections in the glass. Because once the mirror shows you something not meant to be seen, it does not forget. It waits. It remembers. It reflects. Some doors open when you look into them, others when you answer, But what if that answer was never meant to be spoken? Our second story begins with a message that should have remained unread. A text from someone who should not have been able to send one. She thought it was harmless. She even laughed. But the phone wasn't looking for a response. It was looking for permission. Story 2. The map led him somewhere. No one escapes. Eli Garner had always trusted technology more than his instincts. Even as a child, he believed a blinking light on a screen over his own sense of direction. So when his GPS suggested a shortcut through a lesser-known back road across Nevada, he accepted it without hesitation, despite the signs warning of limited access. Despite the stretch of highway that had served travelers for decades, Eli clicked confirm route and turned off the interstate. The first few miles were nothing unusual. Cracked asphalt, loose sand wind, pushing across the road like a tide trying to reclaim it. His car, a silver sedan, hummed beneath him, steady and faithful, the only sound for miles, as the radio signal faded into static. He passed a broken sign half buried in dirt, the letters too faded to read. Still, he went on. The road thinned, grew bumpier, the kind that rattled deep into your spine and made you wonder if you had missed a turn. His phone had lost signal, but the GPS app still showed a blue path, so he kept following it deep into the desert with no other cars in sight. No phone towers, no buildings. Just an endless pale sky stretching over land, too quiet to be empty. He drove for nearly an hour when the engine gave a low cough, and the dashboard lit up with a low fuel warning. Eli cursed under his breath and slowed down, hoping to make it to the next town the GPS claimed was only 15 miles away. But those 15 miles stretched endlessly. Each turn led to another curve, then another patch of cracked desert road until the car sputtered and rolled to a stop in the middle of nowhere. The sun dipped lower, bleeding orange across the horizon, and the air felt heavier, as if the desert itself was waiting. He stepped out of the car and scanned the landscape. Nothing but dry shrubs and distant hills shimmering in the heat. Mirage. But in the distance, maybe a mile or two, there was a small cluster of rooftops just beyond the curve of the land. With no signal, no car, and no better option, Eli grabbed his water bottle, locked the car, and began walking toward what looked like a town. The heat clung to him, dried his throat, burned his skin, but he pushed forward. Dust rising with every step, as if the earth was trying to erase his footprints. The town came into view slowly. Wooden buildings, sun-warped and leaning. Lampposts without bulbs. A diner, a barber shop, a general store. All frozen in time like a movie set built and abandoned. He crossed the threshold and the temperature seemed to drop slightly. Not cool, just still, as if the air had stopped moving. He stepped onto the sidewalk and the creak of old boards underfoot echoed far too loud. The town was not empty. Not exactly. He saw movement behind dusty windows, shapes watching from inside. But when he knocked, no one answered. Doors remained closed. Eyes vanished behind curtains. Then he heard it. A radio playing a tune from decades ago, soft and distant. He followed the sound to the diner. The door opened without resistance, and the bell above it jingled a cheerful sound that felt wrong in the silence. Inside the booths were clean, the counter polished. A pie sat under a glass dome, fresh as if baked that morning. Behind the counter stood a woman in a pale blue dress, hair pinned high, smiling as if expecting him. Eli greeted her, but her smile did not change. She pointed to a booth. He hesitated, then sat unsure if this was real or some strange hallucination from dehydration. She brought water in a spotless glass and a menu with nothing on it. When he asked where he was, she tilted her head like she had not heard him properly, then walked away behind the counter and disappeared into the kitchen. He stood up to follow, but the door back there would not open locked from the other side. The radio kept playing, but now the words were wrong. The melody familiar, but the lyrics twisted, whispering things he could not quite make out. He left the diner and found more people on the street now, all dressed like it was 1948. Their clothes, neat faces, pleasant, but no one spoke. They moved with purpose, but without urgency, looping back and forth between the same buildings as if performing a routine. Eli tried speaking, tried yelling, but no one reacted. He walked up to a man who looked straight through him and continued folding papers into a mailbox, then unfolded them again and repeated the act over and over. The sky dimmed, clouds sliding in from nowhere, and the streetlights flickered to life, casting a pale orange glow that made the shadows stretch. Wrong. Eli ran back to the edge of town, tried to retrace his steps, but every turn brought him back to the center. The streets curved in ways that defied geometry. Signs changed direction. The map on his GPS still showed the blue line ending here, as if this had always been the destination. He returned to his car, but it was no longer where he had left it. The road itself was gone, replaced by sand and brush, like it had never existed. The rooftops of the town loomed closer now, the buildings pressed in, the space between them narrowing. Every alley felt like a trap. He ran until his legs gave out, collapsed onto a porch where a child sat watching him. The boy smiled and spoke a single sentence Eli could not understand, but it echoed in his head like memory, not language. When he woke, he was in a house that was not his. The bed too firm, the air too still. He looked around and saw the same furniture from the homes he had passed, the same wallpaper, the same humming from the radio. Outside the window, the town moved in slow repetition. People walking the same paths, faces unchanged. He opened the front door and stepped outside, but the street was quieter now. Fewer people, but each face looked more like his, their features slightly off but familiar. He saw himself at the diner reading a menu, saw himself walking into the general store, heard his own voice echoing in the radio static. He tried to scream, but his mouth moved without sound. Eli wandered the town for days or weeks, or maybe longer. Time bent strangely here. The sun rose and set, but never in the same direction. The shadows moved before the light did. He scratched his name into the wood of the diner porch, but the next morning, it was gone. The only sign that he had ever been real was the reflection he saw one night in the shop window. The glass showed not his face, but a dozen versions of it layered over one another, each blinking at different times, each mouth moving in silent loops. Eventually, he stopped trying to leave. The street stopped shifting. The people stopped repeating. They just stood and stared as he passed, their eyes empty, their smiles frozen. The town had accepted him, absorbed him into its pattern. He understood now. This was not a place on any map. It was a destination for those who trusted machines more than themselves, who followed a voice on a screen instead of the one inside their gut. No one escapes because no one remembers how they arrived. Not really. And by the time they question it, the town has already rewritten them. Eli was no longer a traveler. He was a fixture, a background shape in someone else's arrival story, waiting to be seen and never remembered. We carry our fears like weight in our pockets, but some fears don't wait to be carried. They wait in silence down tunnels no one should enter. Our next story is about someone who ignored every instinct, followed a map too old to be trusted, and found himself somewhere no one escapes, not even in memory. Story 3. The Tunnel. Only returns. Whispers. not people. Tess Rivera had never believed in stories meant to scare children or urban legends whispered on internet forums. But when her friends invited her on a weekend trip through rural Pennsylvania, she agreed partly out of boredom and partly to prove that fear was always a choice. On the third day, they parked near a rusted gate where the old railway had once passed through the hills. Behind it, a path wound into overgrown trees and broken stone, leading to the entrance of a long-abandoned military tunnel, known locally as the Whisper Tunnel. It had been sealed in the 1960s after a train derailed inside killing 12 servicemen, and since then had become the center of countless tales. The kind told over flashlights and fire pits, the kind that dared you to say your name aloud inside and listen for what might answer. Her friend Mark had read about it online and now stood with his phone ready to film a challenge for social media. Tess rolled her eyes but followed him, and two others, Rachel and Dion, as they passed the crumbling warning sign that said, "Danger, unstable structure entry prohibited." The tunnel mouth was black, a wet, gaping void that swallowed sound. Even their footsteps felt absorbed as they stepped inside, and the air shifted from dry autumn chill to damp cellar breath. The walls were covered in graffiti, most of it old faded declarations of teenage courage and desperation. Tess ran her hand along the brick, smooth in some places, cracked in others. The light from their headlamps created long shadows that bent upward along the ceiling like fingers reaching down for them, and the farther they walked, the more the air seemed to hum, not with sound, but with pressure, a kind of vibration in the chest that made her stomach tighten and her thoughts slow. She brushed it off, told herself it was just the acoustics, the effect of enclosed space and imagination. Mark dared them to shout their names into the tunnel to test if the legend was real. He went first, yelling his name and laughing as it echoed back in delay. Rachel and Dion followed, grinning, when the tunnel repeated their voices perfectly. Tess hesitated not out of fear, but something sharper like instinct. Her name had weight. She had always felt that, and speaking it aloud into a place like this felt like giving it away. Still under their teasing, she gave in and called out her name. Tess Rivera. Her voice shot forward down the corridor and bounced back with a delay. But something in the echo was wrong. It wasn't just the sound, it was the shape of it, the way it returned, just slightly altered. Her name came back. Not as Tess Rivera, but as Tess come closer. The others froze, looked at her as if waiting for a punchline, but she said nothing because she had not said those words. Yet the echo had, and now the tunnel whispered them again. Tess, come closer. She stepped back, heart hammering, unsure if it was a trick or echo distortion or something deeper. Rachel laughed nervously, but suggested they go farther in to test the effect, so they walked another 50 feet. The darkness swallowing their lights until they felt submerged in something older than concrete. The whispers began again, but this time no one had spoken. The tunnel was speaking first, now whispering phrases that didn't match anything said aloud, phrases that belonged to memories Tess had never shared, secrets buried so deep she barely remembered them at all. Her mother's voice calling her name the night her sister died, the way her father cried when he thought no one was watching. The tunnel knew these sounds and fed them back to her softly. At first, then louder, like it was trying to replace the silence in her head. She clutched her coat and turned to leave, but behind her Dion had vanished. Mark and Rachel shouted for him, but there was no sound of running. No footsteps, only the tunnel responding. Dion isn't coming back. Tess isn't leaving yet. Mark rushed forward, shouting Dion's name, his voice cracking against the walls, then fading like smoke. He reached a part of the tunnel where the walls shimmered like heat waves, and then he too was gone. Rachel screamed, turned and grabbed. Tess pulling her back toward the entrance, but the direction had changed. What had been a straight line now curled impossible ways. Their lights began to flicker, then die. The only light left came from the faint glow ahead, and that glow pulsed in rhythm with the whispers. Tess, stop. Tess, stay. Tess, speak. Her name repeated again and again, each time layered with voices. Not her own, the voice of her dead sister, her childhood friend, her reflection in the mirror when no one else was home. Rachel collapsed, sobbing in a corner, and then was gone without sound or struggle, as if swallowed. Tess was alone now. The tunnel no longer echoed. It spoke directly, and the voice was hers, but not hers. Older, younger, split across years of memory and regret. It offered comfort, but also command. She walked forward, unable to stop, and at the end of the tunnel, she saw light, but not daylight. It was a wall of glass, like a mirror, but not reflecting her. It showed her friends laughing outside the tunnel, eating snacks by the car, waiting for her, as if she had never gone in. She reached out to touch it, but the glass held firm, and her hand left no print. The whispers returned louder, now filling her head. Tess is still here. Tess can watch forever. And then she saw herself walk out of the tunnel, or something that looked like her, same face, same clothes, but the eyes were wrong. Empty like stone. She banged against the glass, but no one turned. Her voice no longer her own, just another whisper on the wall. The tunnel had taken her like it had taken others and given back something hollow. The locals never spoke of the tunnel directly, but sometimes at night, when the wind was right, you could hear your name carried through the trees, soft as breath. And those who heard it often returned to listen, and some never came out. Not because they disappeared, but because they became the echo waiting for someone else to call their name. And when they did, the tunnel always answered, because the tunnel only returns whispers, not people. Most people fear the dark, but few understand what truly hides in it. For those who work alone at night, silence isn't peaceful, it's a pressure. A pulse. And when the shift refuses to end, something else always begins. This next story belongs to someone who took the night shift and never left. Story 4. The Night Shift That Never Ended. Juliana Chen had never been one to say no to overtime. When the offer came after her third consecutive night shift at Haven Ridge Mental Health Facility, she agreed without hesitation. The hospital had reopened only a year ago, after 2 decades of being shuttered, following a fire that destroyed one wing and a string of unsolved patient disappearances. Its new management branded it as a modern recovery institution built on top of the past. Juliana was new to the area, eager to make an impression, and eager to earn the extra pay. She signed the extension without question, and stayed as the other nurses clocked out and left one by one with polite nods and tired smiles. The night grew quieter. The halls dimmed into a darker shade of sterile. The air seemed denser after midnight, as if the vents carry memories instead of oxygen. Her rounds were simple. Take vitals, administer one last medication, and double-check the patient log. She moved through each ward methodically, her shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum floor. But when she reached Wing D, a part of the building that had been technically closed for renovation, she noticed something strange. A room that wasn't on her tablet log, its door slightly ajar. The plaque read, Ward 0. It wasn't possible. She checked again, refreshed the screen, but no such listing existed, and yet there it was. Cold air leaked from the gap, and lights flickered inside, low and rhythmic, as if keeping a breathless pace. Curiosity sparked, and caution dimmed. She pushed the door open. The hallway was colder than the rest of the building, longer than it should have been. The lights overhead buzzed erratically, casting soft yellow glows that rolled forward like a wave. She stepped inside, and the door clicked softly shut behind her. She turned, but the handle had no give. Not locked, not broken, just wrong. Like it belonged to something that did not care to be touched. She walked forward, calling out, unsure if this was a test or some system error. Her voice echoed not once, but twice, as if someone far ahead was repeating her words. The same tone, the same hesitation. Down the hallway, rooms lined the walls with large observation windows. Inside were empty beds, medical equipment, and walls covered in peeling murals of flowers and clouds. One room flickered with light, even though nothing in it moved. Another had a chair facing the wall and a cup of water still full on the side table, as if someone had just stepped out. She turned back, deciding it was enough. She had seen something she was not meant to see. But when she reached the end of the corridor, it did not lead back to where she had entered. Instead, it opened into a stairwell that descended far below ground, more than the building's design would allow. There was no signage, no exit markers, just steps and darkness, and the growing sense that she was being watched from every camera corner and every mirror-like reflection on polished floors. She took one step, then another. Her flashlight flickered, even though the battery was full. A mechanical whirring started below, a noise like gears turning after years of rust, and then silence again. She reached the bottom and found herself in a hallway with no windows, no patients, no medical supplies, just filing cabinets stacked against the walls, some still open with papers yellowed and fragile. She glanced at one name, not hers, but familiar. She turned the page, and it was her mother's diagnosis from 20 years ago, something she had never spoken about to anyone, with details that only her family would know. Her hand trembled, and the pages curled slightly as if resisting her presence. Then came a whisper, faint and deliberate. Her name said 3 times from behind in voices that did not belong together. Male and female, young and old. She spun around and saw a patient gown hanging from a wall, hook white clean and marked with ward 0. She backed away, but the hallway seemed longer now, stretched out like elastic, and the light at the far end began to pulse red. She ran breath, shallow feet thudding against tile, her shadow stretching and twisting on the walls. She reached the end where a single metal door stood half open, and on the other side, a nurse's station, identical to her own, sat empty. She stepped through, and the room was familiar too. Familiar. The desk, the clock, the schedule board all aligned exactly as they had when she began her shift. But outside the window, the trees were wrong. No wind, no movement, just a still painting of night. Her phone buzzed for the first time in hours, but the message was unreadable. Scrambled text with her own photo attached to one she never took. In it, her eyes were closed, mouth open as if mid-scream. She dropped the phone and looked up to see herself behind the desk. Not a reflection, not a hallucination, but a perfect copy, wearing her uniform. Moving her hands, typing her notes, unaware they're real. Juliana, watching from 10 feet away. She screamed, but the room did not hear her. The copy stood, walked down the hallway, and turned the corner exactly as she had done hours earlier. The loop had begun again, but she was not part of it. She tried to leave, but the hallway twisted, returned her to the nurse's station over and over. The faces on the wall began to change pictures of staff she did not recognize, all labeled deceased, but the dates of death were listed as the same day repeated across decades, all tied to overtime, all tied to night shift. She clawed at the walls, but the plaster gave nothing. Behind it, just more walls, and behind those, more names. Every so often, the intercom would crackle, and a soft voice would call for assistance to ward. 0, Juliana stopped responding, stopped screaming. She began watching through the monitors, began recording movements of shadows and people who never entered through any known door. The hours passed, but the clock stayed the same. She watched new nurses sign their overtime slips, watched them vanish down corridors, no longer mapped, and understood finally what it meant to stay too long. Havenridge had never closed, only folded inward on itself, waiting for one more hand to sign one more step taken after midnight. Now, when they ask where she went, the reports say she clocked out on time, that she left the building and was never seen again. But Juliana knows she is still working, always working, watching others make the same mistake because the shift never ended and the door towards zero never really closed. Some contracts are written in ink, others in silence and in expectation. He thought he was just taking a job no one wanted. But when he signed the contract at midnight, he agreed to more than hours and pay. He agreed to stay. Story 5. He signed the contract at midnight. Isaac Blaine had been out of work for 6 months when he arrived in Cold Harbor, a forgotten town nestled between the mountains of West Virginia, where fog clung to the trees, like something alive, and the streets never seemed fully dry, even on sunny days. He moved into his uncle's spare trailer, promised he wouldn't stay long, and spent his days wandering between half-empty diners and job boards with nothing but paper flyers pinned up for work no one wanted. It was one of those flyers that led him to the old grain warehouse at the edge of town, a monolithic structure with rusted siding and shattered windows that faced the highway like a rotting sentinel. The job posting was simple, handwritten in blocky red ink. Night security guard, 7 days, midnight to 6. No physical labor, no phone use, do not leave your station, payment in cash. When he called the number, a woman with a dry voice gave him directions and told him to arrive by 11:30. The warehouse had no office, just a small trailer beside it with one flickering light and a clipboard waiting for him. The contract was only 1 page. It had no company name, only a signature line and a clause in bold that read, "Do not break your shift." He signed without reading the rest. At midnight, the lights inside the warehouse blinked to life. For the first time in years, Isaac sat in the control booth above the main floor, surrounded by old monitors and a panel of switches that no longer did anything. There was no Wi-Fi, no radio signal, just silence and dust, and the occasional groan of metal settling. The cameras displayed the aisles between old grain silos and abandoned crates, all neatly labeled from 1 to 6. The first night was uneventful. He drifted between boredom and sleep, jolting awake whenever something shifted outside the booth. On the second night, the camera for aisle 5 flickered on. He stared at it for minutes before realizing the feed should not exist. Aisle 5 had collapsed during the fire in 1976, according to the newspaper clippings he had read in town. No one was supposed to be able to access it, but there it was, grainy and gray, showing what looked like a man walking slowly between the silos. The shape passed under a flickering light and turned briefly toward the camera. Isaac leaned closer. The face was his, the exact same jacket, the same scar on the eyebrow from a childhood fall, and then the feed cut to static. When he checked the hallway himself, there was nothing. No one. He told himself it was a glitch, just old wires playing tricks. But every night afterward, aisle 5 came alive. Sometimes it showed the silhouette pacing. Sometimes it showed a door that wasn't there during daylight. One night it showed Isaac himself seated exactly as he was now, but with blood on his hands. He stopped sleeping after that. By the 5th night, he noticed that parts of his memory had begun to blur. He no longer remembered what day it was, or whether he had eaten dinner, or if he had even left the warehouse after his shift. He checked his phone, but the battery was dead, and the charger wouldn't work. His reflection in the glass was dull, eyes rimmed and red face, unfamiliar. On the 6th night, the woman with the dry voice called the control booth directly. There was no ringing, just her voice, flat and mechanical. "You must not leave your station. Your shift is almost complete." He screamed into the receiver, asked who she was, what this place was. But she repeated the same phrase, and then the line went dead. That night, aisle 6 turned on. There had never been an aisle 6. Not on the map. Not in the structure, but the camera showed it clearly narrow and made of concrete with walls that seemed to breathe. He watched something move through it, not walking but pulsing forward like it was made of smoke and bone. It reached the end and stopped. And then the camera turned off. On the 7th night, Isaac packed his bag and tried to leave, but the door to the control booth was locked from the outside. The windows were too small to break through. The intercom clicked on, and the woman spoke again. The contract must be honored. He tore the clipboard from the wall, tried to burn the paper with his lighter, but it wouldn't catch. The words rearranged themselves as he read them. His name shifted, flickered, faded. On the monitor aisle, 5 came back. This time he was watching himself sleep in the control chair, head tilted back, mouth open. But he wasn't asleep, he was watching. Then the feed froze. At exactly 6 a.m., the lights went out. He was standing, but he didn't remember rising. His eyes burned, his mouth was dry. The door opened on its own. Outside, the world was gray, like the sky hadn't remembered how to turn blue. The trailer was gone. The clipboard was gone. His name was gone from his wallet. When he walked back to his uncle's place, no one recognized him. His room was empty. His uncle said he had never come to stay. At the diner, the waitress asked if he was new in town. He tried to explain, tried to scream, but the words wouldn't form. That night, he found himself walking back to the warehouse. The doors opened without touch. The lights turned on without power. The cameras blinked to life, and on aisle 5, a new man appeared. A man he had never seen before, standing where Isaac had stood. Signing a contract at midnight, Isaac watched from the screen. His hands moved across the buttons, but the system no longer responded. He knew now that the job had never been about guarding the warehouse. It had been about staying, keeping the cycle in motion, making sure someone was always watching, always waiting, always part of it. Isaac had signed the contract at midnight, and now he was the one making sure it stayed in place forever. Technology brings us together until it doesn't. A phone found at a garage sale. A message sent too late in a reply that was never meant to come. In our next story, she thought she was responding to a stranger. She didn't realize the message had been waiting for her. Story 6. The message wasn't meant for her. Callie Ward had always loved garage sales, not for the furniture or the clothes, but for the forgotten electronics she collected to study user patterns for her psychology major. She believed that what people left behind told deeper stories than what they chose to keep. So when she picked up an old Samsung phone for $2 from a blanket on someone's lawn, she didn't think much of it. The screen was cracked and it had no charger, but something about the weight of it felt personal. It powered on without being plugged in, showing 70% battery, and the wallpaper was a blurred photo of a street sign half covered in fog. The phone had no apps, no social media, no call history. Just one saved contact labeled only with a dash and one text thread between that contact and the previous owner. The messages were strange, not conversational, more like entries from someone spiraling. The last message read, Don't answer. Whatever it says next, don't answer it. Callie stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was a joke or some viral marketing stunt. Eventually, she replied with a single laughing emoji and locked the screen. The next morning, the battery level had not changed, still 70%. The same cracked screen, the same text thread, but now with a new message from the dash. It simply read, "Hey." She ignored it and went to class that day, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. When she checked the phone again during a lecture, there were 5 more messages, all from the dash, all plain statements like, "It's quiet today," or "Do you like snow?" or "The best time to think is when everyone else is sleeping." They all had timestamps from exactly 3:03 a.m. That night, she left the phone in her drawer, powered off. Or so she thought. But at exactly 3:03, she woke up drenched in sweat and the room was bathed in pale blue light from the drawer. She opened it and found the phone screen glowing message after message flooding in. She didn't open them, just watched as the number climbed past 100. She turned the phone off again and went back to bed. The next day, her roommate said she heard Callie talking in her sleep, saying things like, "I hear you, and not now, and maybe later." Callie didn't remember any of it. That evening, she read the messages. Each one felt invasive, too specific, small observations about her life, written in the tone of someone who had been watching her closely. The way she stirred her coffee, the lyrics she hummed when anxious, the fact that she always locked the door twice. She started to feel a pressure behind her eyes, like her thoughts weren't just thoughts anymore. They were being heard and recorded. The phone sent a new message. "Would you like to leave your body now? Yes or no?" It was clearly a glitch. She thought maybe some art student's weird project, maybe an AI toy she didn't know. She clicked yes. The screen went black for a moment, then flashed once and returned to the home screen. She felt light afterward, not in a good way, but like something had been unhooked inside her. She floated through her classes the next day, unable to focus, and her hands felt foreign, like gloves she was wearing rather than parts of her. She tried to get rid of the phone. She left it at the bus stop, but it was on her desk the next morning. She threw it in the trash, and it rang from under her pillow. She tried smashing it with a hammer, but the screen didn't crack further. It just blinked once, as if laughing. The messages became meaner, darker, asking her questions about regrets, about guilt, about pain, and always ending with a variation of, "Would you like to leave now?" One night she typed, "Please stop," and got an immediate response, "You already said yes." From that moment, mirrors stopped showing her face. She'd walk past reflective surfaces and see nothing. Or worse, she'd see herself staring back, not moving, not blinking, not copying her at all. Her roommate began to avoid her, saying Callie's eyes looked wrong. Her professor said she was missing classes, even though she remembered attending. She found a video on her phone's gallery taken from her dorm hallway at 3:03 a.m. It showed her standing outside the room, knocking softly, even though she had no memory of leaving her bed. The last message that came through simply read, "One body left waiting for the next," and then the phone powered down completely. Callie disappeared the next week. Police found her room untouched, her wallet and ID on the desk, but no trace of her, no signs of struggle, no forced entry, nothing. Her roommate said she hadn't seen Callie for days, but thought she just dropped out midterm stress. They assumed her case was another college burnout, vanishing, but in the spring, someone held another garage sale not far from campus, and a cracked Samsung phone sat quietly among the items. No price tag, no name, no charger, just 70% battery, and one open message thread that began with "Hi, are you there?" Warnings are easy to ignore when you think you know better, But in the woods, signs aren't always suggestions. Sometimes they're the only thing keeping you from disappearing. Our seventh story follows someone who saw the sign, laughed, and walked in anyway. Story 7. She ignored the sign and walked in anyway. Clara Jennings had never been one to follow rules, especially when they were painted in faded red letters on a crooked wooden sign nailed to a tree in the middle of the Appalachian Trail. The sign said, "Closed trail. Dangerous terrain. Do not proceed." But she had driven 8 hours to hike alone to be away from her phone, her parents, her apartment, her unfinished thesis, and especially from the hollow silence that had followed her since her sister's death. 6 months earlier, the air was still and gray, the sun hidden behind thick clouds, the kind of light that made everything feel like it was waiting for something. She stepped around the sign and followed the overgrown path, her boots crunching softly against the wet leaves. The trail narrowed quickly, and the farther she went, the more the forest seemed to shift. The trees lined inward, the air grew heavier, and birdsong vanished entirely. After a mile, she stopped to drink water and check her compass, but the needle spun slowly and then stuck, pointing backward. She thought the battery might be dying, so she turned on her GPS, but the screen flashed once, then went black. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. She told herself she was just off the grid, and that was the point, wasn't it? Escape, silence, solitude. She continued walking, but the trail never curved, never split. It only pulled forward. The same trees, the same pattern of moss and rock repeating again and again. She began to notice carvings on the trees, small initials deep and jagged, but the dates beneath them stretched back further than they should. 1941, 1926, 1893. She told herself it was a gimmick trail, markers by a creative ranger, maybe even a hidden historic path. But there were no plaques, no signs, no footprints other than her own. The deeper she went, the colder it got, and soon she noticed that the wind had stopped completely. The forest was silent. No branches moved, no leaves fell. It was like walking through a photograph. Hours passed, or maybe more. Time had become slippery. She checked her phone again. It was off. She tried to turn it on, but nothing happened, not even the logo screen. She turned around to head back and walked for 20 minutes before realizing the trail hadn't changed. The tree with the initials was still there, the mossy boulder still beside it. She began to move faster, breathing harder, her heartbeat echoing in her ears until she came upon something new, a clearing. In the center was a single wooden cabin, small, weathered with its windows blackened and its door slightly ajar. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, though there was no smell, no heat in the air, no footprints leading in or out. She called out once just in case, but the sound of her own voice startled her. It didn't echo. It didn't even seem to move beyond her lips. She stepped inside. The air was warm. Too warm. The walls were covered in old photographs, black and white, some in color, all of hikers, all staring directly at the camera, none of them smiling. In the center of the room sat a table, and on it, an open journal. The last page read, "If you are reading this, you already know the trail doesn't let you leave." The door slammed shut behind her. She ran to open it, but the knob spun in place like a toy. The window showed the same clearing, but the trees were darker, denser, and closer than they had been seconds ago. She sat down, tried to breathe, steady herself, but the walls pulsed softly, as if the room itself was exhaling around her. A whisper came not from a voice, but from inside her own head. "Walk forward. Keep walking." She closed her eyes, but the image of the trail remained, and now she could see people on it, dozens, maybe more. Some frozen mid-step, some collapsed against tree trunks, all with hollow eyes, all wearing modern clothes, all with hiking packs like hers. She screamed, but nothing came out, not even breath. Her body moved on its own feet, dragging her out the door, which now stood open and inviting. The trail had changed. It now split into 3 directions, none marked, all unfamiliar. She chose the left out of instinct or desperation and walked. The path narrowed further until she had to push between branches that tore her sleeves and scratched her skin. But no blood, came only dust. The trees leaned closer, the sky above a thin gray line barely visible. Her thoughts were no longer her own. They came in fragments. Strange sentences repeated in voices that weren't hers. Over and over, one phrase louder than the rest. She walked in anyway. The trail never ended, never turned, never offered any sign of return. Just the same trees, the same moss, the same silence. At some point, she no longer knew her name. Her hands were smaller, thinner, pale like paper. Her shadow was gone. When she looked down, only footprints remained, but they faced toward her, not away. She heard footsteps behind her, one steady and deliberate, but when she turned, there was nothing. Only the trees leaning just slightly more forward, as if listening. By the time the sun should have set, there was no change in light. She came upon another clearing, but this time there was no cabin, only a single photograph pinned to a tree. It was her standing on the trail, staring into the camera, not smiling eyes, unfocused. Behind it the sign, the one she had ignored, still crooked, still red, still saying, "Do not proceed." But now beneath it, a second line carved crudely into the wood said they never come back, but they always keep walking. The last thing she remembered was the sound of leaves shifting not above her, but below. And then the trail moved. Not her, not her feet. The trail itself, pulling, swallowing, and closing behind her. Months later, a ranger found a journal near the edge of the closed path. It was open to a blank page, but when he turned it over, he found a photo stuck to the back. It was a girl, face pale, eyes distant, standing in the same woods he patrolled every week. A new sign was posted after that, large and yellow, with block letters saying, "Trail permanently closed, no exceptions." But sometimes hikers still slip through, and when they do, no one goes looking because no one ever comes back. Only their boots left behind pointed toward the forest as if they had changed their minds too late. Kindness is a powerful thing, but not all requests deserve it. At a funeral, a stranger made a simple offer, and with a single word, one man stepped out of his world and into something else entirely. Because the last story tonight isn't about saying goodbye to the dead, it's about saying yes to the wrong question. Story 8. He agreed. Before asking what for, Jonathan Carr had only planned to attend the funeral, out of politeness. The deceased Arthur Bell had been a former professor at the university where Jonathan now worked as a custodian. They had never spoken more than twice, but Jonathan had always respected how Arthur treated everyone equally. Even staff, no one else noticed. The funeral was held at a small chapel outside town, surrounded by pine trees, and an oppressive silence that made every step on the gravel path echo like thunder. There were only 6 people in attendance. Jonathan didn't recognize any of them, except for the man in the front row who wore a black coat too heavy for spring and a look too calm for morning. When the service ended and others drifted toward their cars, Jonathan lingered by the casket. He didn't know what to say. The man in the black coat approached. He didn't introduce himself. He simply said, "Would you like to help carry him home?" Jonathan, unsure how to respond, simply nodded. He wasn't sure why he said yes. The man led him around the back of the chapel, where a narrow trail descended into the woods. There was no hearse, No other pallbearers, just Jonathan and the stranger, and the weight of something not quite solid wrapped in linen. They carried the form in silence for what felt like hours. The deeper they went, the more the forest changed. Trees stood taller than they should. The ground softened underfoot. There were no birds, no wind, only the sound of their breathing and the occasional crack of a distant branch. Eventually they reached a clearing. In the center was a single wooden bench and a freshly dug grave. The man placed the body down and turned to Jonathan. "This part is yours." He handed Jonathan a small rusted shovel, not big enough for the task. Jonathan dug anyway. The earth was dense, darker than any soil he'd ever seen, and it smelled faintly of iron and something sweet and rotting. As he dug, he began to see pieces of things buried in the soil. A cracked lens from eyeglasses, a torn collar with a faded name tag, a badge that looked like it belonged to a janitor. All of them bore initials matching people Jonathan vaguely remembered from campus, but hadn't seen in years. When the hole was finally deep enough, the man said, "Speak his name so he knows he's home." Jonathan hesitated, then whispered, "Arthur Bell." The ground shifted. The wind returned and the sky darkened, even though the sun hadn't yet set. They buried the form, and the man nodded. Once. "Thank you for your kindness." Jonathan turned to leave, but the trail was gone. The trees had shifted. The path behind him was now a wall of roots and bark. He looked back at the man, but he was already gone. Jonathan wandered for what felt like days. His watch had stopped. His phone had no service. When he finally emerged from the forest, the chapel was no longer there. In its place was a field overgrown with weeds and broken stone markers, names carved into them, but all unreadable. He walked back into town, dazed and dirty, but no one recognized him. His keys no longer fit his apartment. His name wasn't on the university roster. His reflection looked wrong, like it was a step behind his movements. He went to the cemetery to check if Arthur Bell had ever been buried. There was no record. He wasn't even listed as deceased. That night, Jonathan dreamed of a hallway that stretched longer than it should, with doors on either side, all slightly ajar, all whispering his name in voices that sounded like his own. He now walks the campus at night. No one sees him, but sometimes they feel colder when he passes. A shift in air. A forgotten thought. He still wears his name tag, still sweeps the same steps, but he never clocks out. And if you ever find yourself at a funeral with only 6 people and a man in a heavy black coat offers to walk you home, remember not every kindness is meant to be returned, and some goodbyes are meant to stay unanswered. You made it through 8 stories, 8 lives altered by a single decision. A yes, a step forward, a second of hesitation, or a moment too late. Maybe you saw a little of yourself in one of them. Maybe it reminded you of a time you came close. What matters is that you're still here, still watching, still listening. And if these stories did one thing tonight, I hope they made you pause. Not with fear, but with awareness. Because in life, we rarely know when a choice will echo beyond our reach. Whether it's answering a knock, following a stranger, or ignoring the sign, no one else seems to notice. Every action casts a shadow. But here's the truth. No horror ever tells you mistakes don't define us. What we do after they happen does. So if there's something tonight that made your heart race or your mind wander, hold on to that. Let it ground you. Let it sharpen your instincts. And most of all, let it remind you that curiosity and caution are both survival tools. Use them well. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you found something meaningful in these stories, consider staying with us, subscribing, or even sharing your own story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and never say yes too quickly. Good night.